Michael Harper had been working as a ranger in Bwindi National Park in Uganda for many years, dedicating himself to protecting animals and preserving forests. He knew every corner of the park, could predict animal behavior, and always kept a close eye on his surroundings, understanding that every encounter with wildlife could be unexpected. During one of his patrols, he noticed movement in the tall grass near the trail and saw a large adult gorilla caught in a steel trap. The animal had a visible wound on its paw and sat warily, looking around, its gaze reflecting a mixture of pain, fear, and confusion. Michael stopped at a safe distance and watched the gorilla closely, assessing the situation and trying not to scare it with sudden movements. He crouched nearby and waited for the right moment, carefully studying the trap and the animal's position so as not to cause additional pain. The forest around him was quiet, with only the sun's rays gently illuminating the grass through the foliage and a light breeze rustling the leaves. The gorilla, although frightened, did not try to run away, watching the rescuer, and this moment marked the beginning of a quiet trust between them that would later grow into a special bond. Michael cautiously approached the animal, trying not to make any sudden movements. The huge adult gorilla was lying on its side, breathing heavily. Its paw, trapped in a steel trap, was injured, and every movement caused it pain. Michael spoke in a calm voice, trying to make it understand that he would not harm it. Using a sturdy tool, he began to slowly pry open the jagged jaws of the trap. The metal yielded with difficulty, but after a few minutes, the paw was free. The gorilla did not try to run away. It was too weak. Its gaze was full of fatigue and pain, but not fear. Michael quickly assessed the situation. Without the help of veterinarians, the animal might not survive. He took out his radio and called the rescue service, giving them the exact coordinates. While he waited for them to arrive, he stayed close to the gorilla, shielding her from the sun and giving her water from his canteen, trying not to disturb her unnecessarily. After a while, several rescuers in beige and green uniforms appeared on the forest path with a stretcher. They approached quietly so as not to scare the animal. Working together, they carefully lifted the gorilla and laid her on a sturdy stretcher, securing her with straps so as not to damage her paw. In a coordinated and unhurried manner, they carried it to a vehicle parked in a forest clearing and carefully loaded it into the back of an SUV to take it to a veterinary clinic. The veterinary clinic greeted them with coolness and the smell of antiseptic. As soon as the car was opened, the veterinarians and rescuers worked together seamlessly. The stretcher was carefully moved inside, where a spacious box for a large animal was already prepared. The huge gorilla lay motionless, but his eyes followed every movement of the people. Michael stayed close by. He wanted to make sure the gorilla was in good hands. The veterinarians carefully examined the paw that had been injured in the trap. The wound was deep, but fortunately there were no fractures. The doctor treated the injury with antiseptic, gave an injection of painkiller, and began to apply a sturdy bandage. At the same time, the assistants checked the animal's breathing, pulse, and general condition, connecting monitoring equipment. While the doctors were working, Michael watched as the tension gradually left the gorilla's powerful body. Her breathing became more even, her gaze calmer. The veterinarian gave his initial verdict. With proper care and subsequent rehabilitation, the animal would make a full recovery. For Michael, this was the most important thing, to see that his efforts had not been in vain. A few days after treatment, the large gorilla finally got back on its feet. The veterinarians decided that it would be better for him to stay in a spacious enclosure next to the clinic, rather than in the ward, where he could breathe fresh air and gradually recover. The enclosure was surrounded by a high fence and trees, and there were other animals nearby that had been brought in for treatment. Michael often came to visit Kwama. At first, the gorilla watched the man warily, but gradually got used to his presence. Michael brought fruit, sat down next to the fence, and simply talked to him in a calm voice, as if to an old friend. Every day, he saw the animal become stronger and more confident, and a special bond of trust developed between them. Soon, Kwama stopped hiding in the far corner of the enclosure and came out to greet the rescuer when he saw him. Michael smiled. It seemed that the animal understood who had saved him from trouble. For Michael, these encounters were more than just checking on the patient's condition. They were the beginning of a real friendship between a man and a gorilla. Months passed. Kwama fully recovered and turned into a strong, confident giant. He got used to Michael's frequent visits, and Michael got used to seeing that familiar gaze waiting for him behind the fence every morning. They spent hours together. The rescuer brought fresh fruit, talked about his work, and the gorilla listened in his own way, quietly swaying, sometimes reaching out his hand through the bars. For Michael, it became more than just caring for his charge. It was a feeling of true friendship. But the day came when the veterinarians announced Kwama was ready to return to the wild. Michael walked him to the car, his heart sinking. He knew he would no longer see this animal every day. When the cage was lifted onto the truck, Kwama looked at him one last time. A long, heavy look, as if understanding that their paths were diverging. Michael stood and watched as the car drove away down the road, disappearing into the morning fog. Years passed. Michael continued to work as a rescuer, but life took its toll. He was getting older, and his health was failing. Sometimes he would sit at home, looking through old photographs of himself with Kwama, and wonder if his friend was still alive, wandering through the dense jungle, or sitting in a sunny clearing. In his memories, he often returned to that morning of farewell, when the gorilla's gaze seemed to say, "Thank you." Over the years, Michael began to weaken. He appeared on the street less and less, participated less and less in rescue operations, and stayed at home more often. The disease was wearing him down, imperceptibly but inexorably. One morning, he was found pale and barely breathing. Without wasting a minute, he was taken to the clinic, the very same one located right next to the veterinary center where Kwama had once been treated. Michael was placed in a separate ward and hooked up to machines, but the doctors knew that his strength was running out. And then one day, Kwama appeared right at the clinic door. The huge but incredibly calm gorilla walked down the corridor so quietly that even the doctors froze in surprise. No one stopped her. Everyone knew how much Michael meant to this animal. Kwama fearlessly entered the ward. He stopped by the bed, lowered his heavy head onto the edge, and stared at Michael for a long time with his intelligent dark eyes. The rescuer, struggling to open his eyes, saw him and smiled weakly. That same warm, grateful smile that said it all. The joy of meeting, farewell, and silence. That same day, Michael's heart stopped. He was buried near his home, under a spreading tree that he himself had once planted. Kwama came there every day. He sat by the grave for hours, sometimes tapping his palm quietly on the ground, as if calling his friend, and did not leave even at night. Neighbors said that the gorilla guarded Michael's peace until the wind and rain erased the fresh traces of the funeral. The sun was just rising above the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. A gentle breeze lazily ruffled the tops of the tall, dry grass on the outskirts of a small American village. It was early autumn. The air was fresh and clear, and the ground still retained the coolness of the night. Farmer John Harper, a sturdy man in his 50s, rose at dawn as usual. He poured himself a strong cup of black coffee, stepped out onto the porch of his wooden house, and paused for a moment to enjoy the silence. All that could be heard were the occasional crowing of roosters, the chirping of birds, and the distant bleating of his goats. Finishing his cup, John threw on his work jacket, grabbed his old hat, and walked along the familiar path to the pasture. Sparse trees lined the road, casting long morning shadows. At the barn, he checked the bolts on the fly, made sure the gate was closed, and continued on his way to where his animals grazed peacefully among the tall beige grass. At the edge of the field, he could see his favorite white goat, which always greeted its owner with a soft bleat. For John, the morning began calmly, and as usual. Harmony reigned around him, and nothing foreshadowed trouble. John headed toward his beloved white goat, which usually grazed peacefully at the edge of the pasture. The dry beige grass rustled softly under his footsteps, and the morning sun was just beginning to rise, painting the field with golden glints. But the familiar, peaceful scene suddenly turned into a scene of horror. The goat lay on its side, unable to get up, its body wrapped in a huge spotted python. The thick snake made several tight turns, one under its belly, another across its back, and a third deep under its neck like iron hoops. Each movement of the snake resembled the slow compression of a steel spring. In the sun, its golden brown scales shimmered as if polished. The goat bleated desperately, twitching its legs, but with decreasing strength. Its eyes were wide open with horror, its breathing becoming ragged. John instantly realized that he couldn't handle it alone. He shouted, hoping that one of his neighbors would hear him, but it was quiet and empty around him. With trembling hands, the farmer took out his phone and dialed the emergency number. All he could do was pray that help would arrive in time. The python was in no hurry. It just tightened its coils, slowly immobilizing its prey, while John stood paralyzed with fear and despair, watching as the life of his beloved animal hung in the balance. Two bright red rescue SUVs quickly pulled up on the dusty country road. It was already noon. The scorching sun had turned the grass yellow beige, and the air shimmered with heat. John Harper led the rescuers straight to the edge of the field, where a white goat lay on its side, completely constricted by the thick coils of a huge python. 5 specialists in dark blue uniforms with reflective stripes and wildlife service emblems got out of the vehicles. They acted swiftly and smoothly, as one team. The equipment was unloaded in seconds, and everyone immediately took their place. First, the team leader aimed a powerful sprayer, from which a thick white jet burst forth. The cold, foaming liquid covered the python's scales, making them dull and slippery. Under the bright sun, the drops glistened like glass beads, running down the snake's tense coils. When the snake's grip loosened slightly, 2 rescuers carefully slid long metal rods under the lower rings to lift them and create a gap. 2 others held the python's head at a distance using rigid bars with loops, preventing it from lunging or changing position. Every movement was precise and measured. The rescuers worked without haste, but quickly, removing coil after coil. John stood nearby, feeling cold sweat running down his back, but he did not interfere. The professionals were acting confidently. The sun was blinding, the pasture around them seemed endless and empty, and the tension of the struggle between man and wild predator was almost palpable. After intense efforts by the rescuers, the goat was finally freed from the python's tight coils. The animal's heavy body trembled with stress, but it could now breathe freely. 5 specialists in dark blue suits quickly examined the goat on the spot, checking its breathing and the condition of its limbs. The long sticks and rope loops were carefully removed, but the team's attention remained on the animal. The goat slowly raised its head, its eyes wide open, but no longer filled with panic and terror. One of the rescuers gently supported her under the chest, while another checked her legs for bruises or wounds caused by the snake's pressure. The others stood nearby, ready to help if the animal tried to stand up or make a sudden move. John stood slightly to the side, clenching his fists, watching every movement. He understood that the goat was still in shock and that her recovery would take time. Despite the stressful situation, the atmosphere was tense but positive. The rescue had been successful, and now all that remained was to support the animal and let her recover. The sun was high above the field, illuminating the pasture, the golden grass shimmering in the light. The white goat was slowly brought back to consciousness after severe stress, carefully supporting her under the chest and checking her breathing and legs. Then they began to carefully examine her above the snake's coils to make sure there were no serious injuries, and the veterinarians began to treat the wounds caused by the python's attack. After a thorough examination, the white goat was carefully laid down on a soft covering on the pasture. Veterinarians and rescuers began to apply bandages step by step to all areas where the python had constricted the animal's body. Every movement was carefully thought out. The bandage was applied gently so as not to cause pain and securely fixed the skin. For minor abrasions and scratches, blue medical plasters were used, carefully sticking them to the affected areas to protect the skin and speed up healing. The rescuers gently supported the goat under its chest and sides, monitoring its breathing and reactions, ready to catch it instantly if it jerked. The white goat gradually calmed down and no longer tried to break free, but its eyes remained alert. The experience of recent danger had left its mark. The work proceeded slowly and carefully. Every detail was important for a full recovery, and the team of rescuers and veterinarians worked quietly and smoothly so as not to frighten the animal. The golden grass of the pasture shimmered in the sun, emphasizing the calm after the tense rescue and creating a feeling of hope and care. After all the bandages and blue medical plasters had been securely fastened, the white goat gradually came to her senses. Her breathing became steady, her movements more confident, and her gaze calm and attentive. Rescuers and veterinarians were still nearby, gently supporting the animal, checking its legs, neck, and chest to make sure the injuries were healing properly, and nothing was causing discomfort. John Harper stood nearby, feeling relief and joy. He gently stroked the goat's head and neck, and the goat seemed to respond with trust and gratitude. Each step she took was cautious but confident. She could walk across the pasture again, assess her surroundings, and graze. The rescuers watched quietly, smiling, and discussing the success of the operation among themselves, but did not interfere with the animal's natural recovery. Savannah didn't seem to care. Dry grass swayed in the wind, and the sky seemed to be burning from the heat. Amidst this silence, a silhouette moved slowly and uncertainly, as if every movement caused pain. It was a cheetah, but there was no grace or strength left in its gait. It staggered from weakness. There was a huge abscess on its front paw, swollen and tight. It looked unnaturally large, and with every step it took, it seemed as if the paw was about to burst. The pus inside it trembled as if it were alive, making the sight unbearable. Its skin in that spot had darkened and stretched to the limit. It seemed that the pain had become familiar to him. He tried to sit down, but immediately got up. His paw was giving him no peace. His eyes showed anguish, suffering, and a complete lack of hope. No one was around, no sound. Only him and the pain. Then he slowly moved on, following his instincts. He didn't know if anyone would see him, but that hope still lingered inside him. The rescuers approached slowly, so as not to scare the exhausted cheetah. One of them saw the animal trying to get up, but it immediately fell back down, its paw trembling with pain. A huge abscess on its front leg was throbbing. It was the size of a human head, and it seemed that it would explode at any moment. One of the rescuers signaled to the other, "Look, the pus has already started to seep out." They knew there was no time to waste. One held the cheetah firmly by the torso, stroking its head, while the other carefully approached with a sterile scalpel. And when he made the incision, everything around them seemed to freeze. Thick, yellow-white pus gushed out of the wound, accompanied by a strong odor. It flowed in streams, dripping onto the ground and soaking the grass. The animal twitched, but did not break free. It seemed that the cheetah understood that it was being saved. With every second, more and more pus came out, as if the entire leg was filled with this horror. It was not a sight for the faint of heart. One of the rescuers even turned away, but continued to hold on. The cheetah was breathing heavily, but now there was something new in its eyes: relief. After the pus had drained out, the rescuers applied a clean bandage soaked in antiseptic to the wound. The cheetah no longer resisted. He lay there, seemingly drained, but calm. His eyes were half closed, his breathing heavy but steady. They carefully lifted him onto a stretcher. He was so light, as if he were not a wild animal, but simply a bag of bones and skin. His spine and ribs were visible through his stretched, dry skin. His body trembled from dehydration and weakness. The animal ambulance started moving. Inside, it was sterile, with an IV and dim lighting. One of the rescuers sat next to him, fanning the cheetah with a damp cloth. Along the way, they checked his blood pressure and temperature and monitored his breathing. Every minute could have been its last. But the cheetah held on. Despite the pain, it did not growl or hiss. It just lay there, as if, for the first time in a long time, it felt safe. The veterinary clinic was located in the middle of nowhere, but its walls saved hundreds of animals. This is where the cheetah was brought. He was on the brink of death. His body was emaciated, his temperature was unstable, and his paw was swollen even after drainage. But the team was ready. The veterinarian stayed by his side for hours. First, they gave him painkillers, then cleaned the wound again, removing the remaining pus. The bandage was soaked with blood, but even though the pus was no longer flowing so profusely, the inflammation persisted. The fur on his paw was shaved off, revealing irritated red skin with a deep hole from the abscess. The cheetah had to be fed through a tube because he couldn't eat on his own. A drip slowly fed nutrient solutions into his veins. Sometimes he opened his eyes. Sometimes he stared into space. One morning, he moved his ears for the first time in response to a sound. Then he raised his head. It was a small but important step. At that moment, the woman who was caring for him smiled for the first time in all that time. They believed he would pull through. Several days had passed since the operation. Pus was no longer accumulating in his leg. Rescuers came every day, carefully washed the wound, changed the bandages, and doctors closely monitored the slightest signs of inflammation. And more often, with relief, they noted that he was on the mend. The cheetah lay on a soft bedding in the shade of a special enclosure. His body was still emaciated. His bones protruded. His skin hung like old fabric. But now he was eating. In small portions, cautiously, with breaks. His eyes no longer darted around in search of danger. He was watching. Just watching. Every evening, a woman came to him, the same woman who had stood by him in the savannah while he was bleeding to death. She didn't speak. She just sat down next to him. Sometimes she read aloud, sometimes she was silent, and he began to breathe more deeply, more calmly. One day, he suddenly raised his head. He looked at her, then at the door. Then, slowly, with trembling paws, he stood up. Only for a few seconds. But it was like a miracle. He wanted to stand up. He wanted to move. He wanted to live. The savannah was filling with life again. Flocks of birds cut through the orange sky, and the hot wind carried with it the smell of dry earth and a distant thunderstorm. Among the hills, in the tall grasses, a silhouette was creeping. Fast, smooth, almost invisible. It was him, the same cheetah, once dying from a festering wound, now, again the master of speed. On his front leg there was a barely visible scar, but it no longer interfered. It had become part of his history, like a trace of time, of the horror he had experienced and his return to life. He moved easily, with a powerful grace, characteristic only of predators who had escaped from the clutches of death. Sometimes, stopping on a hill, the cheetah looked into the distance, where the trees were lost and the horizon began. The wind stirred the grass, and he felt, somewhere there, hundreds of steps away, lived those who once were not afraid of pain and pus, who approached him when he was already lying, almost broken. He may not have understood the words, but he remembered with his soul the touch of a hand, the taste of water, and the smell of syringes that brought pain, but also salvation. And far, far away, in a small village, a woman would come out every morning with a cup of tea, sit on a bench in front of the house, and look towards the horizon. Sometimes her husband would sit down next to her, also silent. They knew that he had gone, as he should have, back into the wild. But in each of their hearts there remained a thread of connection, invisible, strong. He was a part of their lives, just as they became a part of his path. As the sun was setting, the cheetah raised his head again. In front of him was a boundless savannah, full of sounds, smells, and freedom. He was no longer a victim. He was a memory. He was a force. He was the one who had returned. The savanna stretched to the horizon under the scorching sun. Tall, dry grass rustled in the light breeze, and a small elephant calf walked cautiously beside its mother. It stretched its trunk toward every bush and sniffed the ground, exploring the world around it. Everything seemed calm, but there was a subtle sense of unease in the air, as if nature itself was warning of impending danger. Something moved nearby between the rocks and dried bushes. A shadow flashed and disappeared, its eyes fixed on the baby elephant. The mother noticed the movement, pricked up her ears, and began to carefully lead her baby toward a safer part of the savanna. The wind died down, and the grass stopped rustling, creating a feeling of tense anticipation. The baby elephant, playing and curious, lagged behind its mother for a moment and ran ahead, exploring small puddles and isolated bushes. Not far away, in the background, a large Komodo dragon lurked behind rocks and bushes, watching him. He was almost invisible to the baby, who was happily gurgling and had no idea that someone was watching him closely. The baby elephant played happily in the grass, occasionally stamping its feet on the soft ground and kicking up little clouds of dust. Suddenly, from behind the rocks and dry bushes in the background, a large Komodo dragon rushed out. Its massive body moved quickly and deftly, its long tail swaying, and its sharp claws leaving deep marks on the ground. The monitor lizard's head was lowered, its eyes alert and focused, and its tongue darted out quickly, sensing the smell of the baby elephant. The baby froze in place when it saw the unexpected movement and instinctively took a step back, sensing danger. The baby elephant jerked sharply to the side, trying to run away, but its little legs couldn't keep up with the speed of the Komodo dragon. It let out an alarming sound, a thin, gurgling cry, stamping its feet anxiously on the dry grass and soft earth. The monitor lizard moved after it almost silently, its massive paws deftly parting the grass, its long body bending, ready to strike. The predator's shadow flashed between the bushes, creating the feeling that danger was almost breathing down the baby's neck. At that moment, the baby elephant's mother noticed the impending threat. She instantly tensed her body, spread her ears, and trumpeted loudly, her cry echoing across the savanna, bouncing off rocks and bushes. The baby elephant froze when he heard his mother's voice and turned his head in her direction. The mother stepped forward, moving toward her baby with complete determination to protect him. The Komodo dragon froze for a moment, assessing the sudden threat, its eyes following the massive figure of the elephant. The baby elephant's mother rushed forward, trumpeting loudly and spreading her ears. Her massive body moved with unexpected speed for such a large animal. The Komodo dragon, sensing the threat, paused for a moment, but then abruptly retreated, writhing its entire body and swinging its long tail. The elephant, protecting her baby, lowered her head and trunk, showing her readiness to attack. Her feet trampled the ground, raising dust, and her gaze was fixed directly on the predator. The monitor lizard darted sharply to the side, but the elephant did not let him get away. She tried to hit it with her front leg, then made a short lunge with her head to scare it away. The Komodo dragon dodged, lashing its tail on the ground so that the dry grass flew in all directions. Meanwhile, the baby elephant jumped further and further away, but did not stop crying anxiously. The sounds of the struggle echoed across the savanna, the trumpeting of the elephant, the hissing of the monitor lizard, the pounding of heavy feet. A few kilometers away, a group of rescuers driving through the savanna in a jeep heard a strange rumbling and alarming sounds. They stopped the car, listened, and heard a sharp trumpeting. It could be a female elephant in distress. One of the people immediately pointed in the direction of the noise, and the rescuers began to move faster, heading towards the place where the sounds of struggle were coming from. Rescuers rushed to the scene and were met with an alarming sight. A huge elephant stood between her calf and a massive Komodo dragon, which was slowly approaching again, hissing despite her blows. The baby elephant cowered against its mother, letting out piercing cries while the ground around them was trampled and covered with traces of the struggle. The rescuers instantly realized that they had to act quickly to prevent a tragedy. One of them took a long pole, another a thick stick with a cloth at the end, and the third began to shout and wave his arms, distracting the predator. They approached cautiously but decisively, shouting loudly and banging on the ground to force the monitor lizard to retreat. The Komodo dragon, sensing a new threat, froze, turned its head, and tried to circle around the people. But the rescuers formed a semicircle, driving it further away from the elephants. The monitor lizard finally retreated, slowly disappearing into the dry grass of the savanna. The elephant stood still for a few more seconds, trumpeting loudly, then turned to her calf, sniffed it with her trunk, and gently nudged it closer to her. The rescuers stood at a distance, watching to make sure the predator did not return. The tension gradually subsided, but the air was still thick with anxiety, and the elephant clearly remained on guard, shielding her baby. When the threat receded and the monitor lizard disappeared into the dry bushes, the rescuers slowly approached the elephant and her calf, keeping their hands visible so as not to scare the frightened animal. The elephant was still trumpeting nervously, her ears spread wide and taking sharp steps toward the people, showing that she was ready to defend herself. But the group worked together seamlessly. Two experienced employees distracted the elephant with soft sounds and smooth movements, while another checked on the baby from a safe distance. They noticed a deep scratch from the monitor lizard's claws on the baby elephant's leg. The wound was not life-threatening, but it needed to be treated urgently. One of the rescuers took antiseptic, bandages, and a long stick with a soft tip out of his bag, so that, if necessary, he could gently push the mother away or move the bushes without harming the animals. Several long minutes of intense work passed. While one rescuer spoke in a quiet, soothing voice, the other carefully treated the wound and applied a light bandage. The baby elephant trembled and whimpered quietly, but no longer screamed, sensing that the danger had passed. The mother elephant was breathing heavily, but seeing that the people were not harming her calf, she gradually stopped waving her trunk threateningly. When the treatment was finished, the rescuers slowly moved away, allowing the mother to approach her baby again. They decided to stay nearby and watch the elephants to make sure the baby did not get worse. When the rescuers were sure that the baby elephant could walk without serious difficulty, they decided to move further away, leaving the animals alone. The elephant carefully scanned the savanna, as if checking to see if the monitor lizard had returned. Convinced that there was no danger, she gently nudged the baby with her trunk, and they slowly made their way to the nearest grove, where there was more shade and moisture. Their steps were heavy but confident, and even from a distance, it was clear how the mother was protecting her calf's every step, shielding it with her body. The rescuers followed them for a while, keeping their distance to make sure that the elephant and her calf could safely leave the dangerous area. Gradually, the silhouettes of the animals disappeared behind the hill, and silence reigned over the savanna once again. The rescuers exchanged glances. Today they had managed to prevent a tragedy, but the wild is always full of surprises. They turned around and headed back to their base to prepare for their next call. Early in the morning, a rescuer named Jack Miller received a call. A fawn was drowning in a forest pond near the Cascade Mountains. The pond was deep in the woods, and the only way to reach it was via a narrow trail. Jack hurried to the call, keeping his trusty partner, a German shepherd named Rex, close by. There was no one on the shore. Before them lay a wide, cold pond, shrouded in a light morning mist. In the distance, barely visible, a fawn was desperately struggling in the water. Jack immediately realized that it was impossible to get there on foot. The bottom was muddy, and the depth was dangerous. He quickly fastened a bright life jacket on Rex, and checked the long rope so that he could pull the dog back in case of danger. Rex stood alert, ready for action. After a short command, Jack, holding the rope tightly, sent Rex forward. The sheepdog took a running start, jumped into the water, and swam confidently toward the small dot in the middle of the pond. Rex paddles confidently with his paws, overcoming the cold current that pulls him sideways. The water is dark and deep, and the fawn is desperately struggling in the distance, every second critical. Jack Miller stands on the shore in a blue jacket, closely watching the dog's movements and controlling the tension of the safety rope so he can help her if necessary. The dog gradually approaches the fawn, confidently holding its course despite the resistance of the current. She gently touches the fawn with her muzzle, helping it stay afloat, and pulls it slightly toward her, keeping the small body on the surface. Jack feels the change in resistance through the rope. Rex is leading the baby to shore. Now the return journey begins. Rex, holding the fawn, swims towards the forest shore, making powerful, confident strokes. The fawn gradually calms down and stops struggling, trusting the dog. Jack, holding the rope, prepares to help bring them both ashore and complete the rescue operation. Rex reached the shore, holding the fawn by the shoulder and carefully pulling it out of the cold water. Jack Miller, standing at the edge of the forest pond in a blue jacket, helped the dog bring the baby ashore, gently supporting it with his hands. The fawn was shivering, its small body wet and barely moving, but Rex held it securely, preventing the slippery body from sliding back into the water. The light morning mist gave the scene a warm softness, despite the tension of the moment. Jack quickly wrapped the fawn in a warm towel, wiping the water from its fur and carefully checking its breathing. He held the baby gently, massaging its legs and stomach to stimulate blood circulation, and spoke softly to it, soothing it. Rex sat nearby, watching his owner's actions closely, ready to intervene again if the fawn became unwell or tried to break free. When the fawn had recovered a little, Jack transferred it to a carrier prepared for transport to the nearest veterinary clinic. He made sure the animal was securely covered and began to walk carefully along the forest path, watching every bump in the ground so as not to disturb the baby. Rex walked alongside, occasionally glancing at the carrier, while the soft morning light reflected off the fawn's wet fur, creating an atmosphere of true rescue. Jack carefully placed the wet fawn, still wrapped in a towel, on the back seat of his car, putting an extra blanket underneath to keep it warm and prevent it from freezing. Rex jumped in after him and settled down next to the fawn, snuggling up to it as if trying to share his warmth. Jack checked the fawn's breathing again, made sure it was calm, and gently closed the door, trying not to make any sudden movements. On the way to the clinic, the car swayed gently on the bends of the mountain road, and the morning light streamed through the windows. Jack periodically looked back to make sure the fawn was okay. Rex lay quietly the whole time, watching the baby closely, only occasionally glancing at his owner. The road was short, but tense. Jack was in a hurry every minute to get the rescued animal there as soon as possible. The veterinary clinic greeted them with a cool corridor and the smell of medicine. Jack quickly carried the fawn inside, where the veterinary team was already waiting. The fawn was carefully laid on the table and examined. Its pulse, breathing, and body temperature were checked. The doctor dried its fur, examined its paws, and listened to its heart with a stethoscope, while Jack stood nearby, stroking the baby's neck and continuing to quietly reassure it. Rex sat nearby, watching every movement warily. The veterinary clinic greeted them with soft lighting and calm silence. Jack carefully carried the fawn inside, still holding it in his arms, wrapped in a towel. Rex walked alongside him, watching his every step. The veterinarian on duty and his assistant were already waiting for them at the reception desk, and they quickly took the rescued baby into the office. While Jack briefly explained how it all happened, the veterinarian checked its breathing, heartbeat, and body temperature, listened to its lungs, and examined its legs for injuries. The assistant gently rubbed the fawn with a dry towel, trying to warm it up, while Jack watched every movement anxiously, as if afraid of missing a single detail. When the initial examination was complete, the veterinarian treated the tiny abrasions on the skin and made sure that the baby's life was not in danger. The fawn was carefully wrapped in a clean, warm blanket and placed on a low couch under an infrared lamp to restore body heat. The vet noted that its breathing gradually became deeper and more even, and the trembling stopped. Rex lay down on the floor next to the couch, keeping his eyes on his new friend, as if guarding him even here, where he was completely safe. Jack finally allowed himself to relax a little. He knew the baby was in good hands, but he still couldn't take his eyes off the tiny fawn, who was quietly sniffling under the soft light of the lamp. When the veterinarians were sure that the baby was no longer in danger, Jack carefully picked up the fawn. It was wrapped in a warm blanket, but it was still shivering, either from weakness or from the fear it had experienced. Rex walked alongside, not straying a step, as if understanding that their little charge still needed care. They left the city and headed back to the forest where they had found him yesterday. The car rolled slowly along the country road, and the interior was filled with a quiet, almost solemn silence, broken only by the sound of the engine. Jack felt the little heart beating in his arms, and mentally thanked fate that they had made it in time, that their efforts had not been in vain. When they reached the familiar clearing, Jack noticed a herd of deer in the distance, grazing peacefully in the morning mist. He carefully got out of the car, placed the fawn on the soft grass, and it took its first tentative step. Rex stood nearby, bowing his head, as if not wanting to spoil the touching moment. Suddenly, a doe, apparently the mother, separated from the herd and walked toward them with quick, springy steps. The fawn, as if forgetting its weakness, happily ran to her, and Jack smiled, feeling a slight sadness at the farewell, but also enormous relief. Their mission was accomplished, a life was saved, and the little runaway was returning home. In July, southern Louisiana was hit by the worst flooding in a decade. Torrential rains turned roads into rivers and pastures into swamps. Farmhouses were waist-deep in water, fences were swept away by the current, and farm animals panicked and tried to escape as best they could. Farmers, volunteers, and rescuers searched for missing livestock. Dozens of kilometers of rural areas were flooded. Cows and horses were searched for by boat. Hills were combed, and the surrounding area was flown over by drones. Every day, more animals were found, but many were still missing. When the water receded completely, residents of a residential area noticed an unusual silhouette on the roof of one of the houses. The house was neat, with a gray-green roof and an attic, and a cow was standing on top of it. The clear sky with light clouds emphasized the strangeness of what was happening. A resident of a residential area in Louisiana went out for his morning walk along the sidewalk to check on his small garden, water his flowers, and collect his mail. The clear sky with light clouds promised a warm day, but his attention was drawn to a strange silhouette on the roof of a neighboring house. He looked closely and was surprised to see that there was indeed a cow standing on the roof, as if calmly observing the neighborhood. The man immediately called his neighbor to share his discovery. A few minutes later, the neighbor arrived, his face also expressing amazement. He said that he had been hearing strange noises coming from the roof for several days, but couldn't figure out where they were coming from. Now both men stood there, staring at the animal in amazement, trying to figure out how the cow got on the roof and how long it had been there. Realizing that they couldn't handle the situation themselves, they decided to immediately call the local rescue service. The man explained the location of the house in detail to the dispatcher, describing the size of the roof and the condition of the animal so that the rescue team could prepare for a safe operation and prevent possible injuries. 20 minutes later, an ambulance with flashing lights pulled up on the quiet suburban street. The car stopped at the curb, and the yard immediately came to life. Neighbors came out of their houses, talked over fences, and pointed to the roof, where the confused cow was still standing. The animal shifted anxiously from foot to foot, mooed, and looked down, as if not understanding how to get off the roof. Two rescuers quickly got out of the car and began to assess the situation. One walked around the house, carefully examining the roof and the adjacent yard, while the other used a radio to contact his colleagues, calling for help and a lift. The homeowner and a neighbor explained that they had been hearing strange noises coming from the roof for several days, but did not expect to see an animal there, and certainly not a cow. Meanwhile, more residents began to come out onto the street. Some filmed the scene on their phones, while others talked among themselves, discussing the incredible situation. The whole scene looked like a scene from a movie. A quiet suburb suddenly turned into the site of a strange event, where an ordinary house became an unusual pasture. A large crane with a long boom drove up to the house, and the operator carefully positioned it directly above the roof. The rescuers began to carefully prepare the ropes and cables, checking the fastenings and safety systems. The atmosphere was tense. Every step required precision, so that neither the animal nor the roof would be damaged, but everything proceeded smoothly and confidently. Two chief rescuers secured ropes around the brown and white cow and attached them to the crane's cables. The cow shifted uneasily, trying to stay on the roof, but the specialists acted calmly and methodically, constantly watching her movements. Every action was thought out in advance. No sudden movements or missteps were allowed to harm the animal or damage the roof. Neighbors watched from a safe distance, some filming the event on their phones. The crane slowly pulled on the cables, and the rescuers watched carefully to make sure the ropes did not slip. Gradually, the cow began to rise, and the atmosphere was both tense and almost unbelievable. The whole neighborhood watched as an ordinary house became the scene of a real rescue operation. When the cow was carefully lowered to the ground, rescuers immediately surrounded her and began to carefully check her condition. One of them gently ran his hand along her back and side, checking for fractures, while another carefully examined her legs, noting every abrasion. They took antiseptic and soft bandages out of the portable first aid kit and treated the wounds quickly but thoroughly. The cow stood still, breathing heavily and trembling slightly from the ordeal, but did not resist. It was clear that she was tired, but she felt that the people would not harm her. The rescuers communicated in short phrases, checking with each other to make sure they hadn't missed anything important. A few minutes later, the farmer arrived at the scene. He had been notified that the cow had been found and was safe. He parked his car right on the side of the road and hurried over to the rescuers, worried about the animal. Seeing that the cow was standing on its feet and already bandaged, the farmer visibly calmed down and breathed a sigh of relief. He thanked the rescuers and asked if the cow needed urgent veterinary care. One of the specialists explained in detail how to monitor the animal's condition, how to treat the bandages, how to observe its breathing and behavior. The atmosphere on the street became calmer. Neighbors who had gathered to watch discussed how unusual it was to see a cow on the roof, while the rescuers packed up their tools, satisfied that there had been no serious injuries. After making sure that the cow could walk on her own, the farmer carefully led her to his truck. The rescuers helped load her onto the truck. They set up a sturdy ramp, supported the animal, and calmed her with their voices and gentle movements so that she would not get scared and lose her balance. The cow slowly climbed the ramp and ended up in the truck, where the farmer secured her so that the trip would be safe. The rescuers checked the bandages on her legs again, made sure the animal was calm, and reminded the farmer to monitor the cow's behavior in the coming days. The atmosphere was tense, but joyful at the same time. The operation was a success, and everyone involved could breathe a sigh of relief. When the truck with the cow drove off, the rescuers began to pack up their equipment, folding ropes and cables, checking that nothing was left on the street. The neighbors gradually dispersed to their homes, discussing the unusual incident and sharing their impressions. One of the rescuers, smiling at the camera, said that situations like this remind us that help can come at the most unexpected moment. And we, the viewers, can also make the world safer for animals. All it takes is attentiveness and a determination to help. Sometimes a single phone call, a single moment of compassion can save someone's life. Friends, animals often find themselves in the most unexpected situations. Today, rescuers showed how important it is to be attentive and provide quick assistance. Take care of your pets. Keep them safe. And remember, sometimes one phone call can save a life. Early morning in Masai Mara National Park, Kenya. One of the rangers was patrolling the savannah in a jeep when he spotted a lioness on a dirt road. She was walking slowly, moving her paws with difficulty, and her belly was so huge that it seemed as if it would touch the ground at any moment. The sun was just rising, bathing the grass in golden light, and the sparse acacia trees cast long shadows. Even from a distance, it was clear that the lioness was barely able to stand on her paws. The ranger stopped the jeep at a safe distance and took a closer look. There was a small cut on the side of her belly. Insignificant, but noticeable. The lioness looked back several times, breathing heavily, her movements constrained by her condition and enormous belly. He realized that the birth would begin very soon and decided to call for backup and proceed with caution. Moving a little closer, the rescuer was able to see the lioness in more detail. The cut on her side was barely visible against her fur, but her belly was striking. It was absurdly large, almost impossibly so. The lioness looked exhausted and cautious, her eyes half closed, her breathing heavy. She could barely stand on her paws, but she watched her surroundings warily. The rescuer stopped the jeep a few meters away and slowly approached the lioness lying in the dry grass of Masai Mara. She hardly moved, only turning her head and watching with a tired gaze. From behind, her body looked disproportionate. Her belly was enormous, hanging down and stretching back toward her hind legs, as if pulling her whole body down. He knelt at a safe distance and carefully examined the predator. There was a wound on the left side of her belly, not deep, but requiring careful treatment. The lioness was breathing heavily, her enormous backward-shifted belly rising and falling steadily. She showed no aggression. She remained alert, but allowed him to stay close. Taking out his radio, the rescuer transmitted the coordinates and briefly described the situation, requesting that a team be sent. He remained nearby, keeping his distance, monitoring the lioness's breathing, and keeping an eye on the situation so that he could immediately begin to help if necessary while reinforcements were on their way. Several rescuers arrived at the scene with equipment and portable protective panels. The lioness lay motionless, only slightly moving her paws, her enormous belly pulling her back, her breathing heavy and slow. The rescuers approached cautiously, assessing the animal's condition and planning their actions so as not to frighten her. There was a visible wound on the left side of the lioness's belly, and one of the rescuers immediately noted the need for careful treatment. One of the rescuers began to gently treat the wound on the left side of the belly, moistening a clean cloth and gently wiping the damaged area. Others helped keep the lioness calm, periodically soothing her with quiet sounds, and prepared bandages to apply a dressing. The lioness remained relatively calm, only slightly moving her tail and turning her head to watch what was happening around her. The rescuers worked in unison to ensure that every movement was safe. When the wound was treated and bandaged, the team prepared for the birth. They laid out panels to provide the lioness with space and peace, cleared the area around her of unnecessary objects, and maintained a safe distance. The lioness, with her very large belly, gradually began to give birth. The rescuers watched the process, adjusted the position of the panels, quietly supported her with their voices, and prepared to help if necessary, without interfering too actively in order to keep the animal calm. The lioness lay in the savannah, her enormous belly completely bandaged, the bandage neatly covering the site of a former wound on her left side. She began to give birth, straining her belly and breathing heavily, but remained calm and confident. The rescuers kept their distance, watching the contractions so as not to interfere with the natural process. When the first cubs were born, the rescuers approached cautiously and saw the little ones making their first hoarse cries. The lioness embraced them with her paws, gently licking and warming them, while her completely bandaged belly remained protected. The rescuers simply watched to make sure that everything was going safely and calmly. After all the cubs were born, the team adjusted the protective panels to maintain peace and quiet around the lioness and her cubs. It was a clear day, with sunlight gently illuminating the savannah, creating an atmosphere of warmth and care. The lioness remained motionless, holding her newborns close, while the rescuers watched from a safe distance, ready to intervene if necessary. While the lioness rested after giving birth, her enormous belly completely bandaged, she slept peacefully, holding her cubs close with her paws. Rescuers carefully approached each newborn, checking their breathing, activity, body temperature, and overall response. They gently picked up the cubs, making sure they were healthy and safe, without disturbing their mother or causing unnecessary stress. The light of the midday sun softly illuminated the savannah, emphasizing the calm and caring atmosphere around them. After carefully examining and confirming the health of each cub, the rescuers gently placed them back with their mother. The lioness, with her completely bandaged, enormous belly, gently hugged and licked her cubs, continuing to protect them with her body. The rescuers moved to a safe distance and watched the lioness and her newborns, who had calmed down and settled comfortably next to their mother. The sunlight illuminated the grass, creating an atmosphere of safety, warmth, and tranquility, and the savannah seemed filled with life and harmony. After all the newborns had been examined and returned to their mother, the rescuers made sure that the lioness, with her enormous belly, was completely bandaged and safe. They quietly removed the protective panels, carefully removing any objects that could interfere with the lioness, and moved to a safe distance so as not to disturb the animal. The lioness watched her cubs closely, pressing them close to her with her paws, her breathing gradually becoming steady. The little cubs settled comfortably next to her, moving their paws slightly and squeaking quietly. The silence of the savannah reigned around them, the soft daylight reflecting off the dry grass and thick bushes, creating a feeling of calm and harmony where the mother and her offspring felt protected. The rescuers slowly loaded into the jeep and began to drive away, leaving the lioness and her cubs alone in the spacious savannah. The lioness, with her completely bandaged, enormous belly, continued to hug and lick her cubs, helping them settle down, warming and protecting each little lion cub. She watched their every move closely, sniffing and gently adjusting the cubs with her paws. The bright daytime sun gently illuminated the grass and bushes, creating an atmosphere of warmth, safety, and harmony in the wild. The mother and her cubs could calmly begin a new life, far from people and any dangers, enjoying the silence and spaciousness of the savannah. It was another day in the wild where the bravery and care of rescuers helped small animals survive. Nature is always full of wonders, and every moment reminds us how important it is to protect it and all its inhabitants. Michael Harper, a wildlife services inspector in Georgia, had been patrolling woodlands and riverbanks for more than a decade. After recent rains, the water had risen. The currents were swift and muddy, the kind of days when animals were more likely to get into trouble. During the day, for about an hour, Michael drove along the river in his light-colored pickup truck and periodically went ashore to scrutinize the area. He watched for any signs of wildlife, listening for the sound of water and the creaking of trees, checking the trails for animal tracks. He had a walkie-talkie on his shoulder, gloves on his belt, a folding knife, and a rescue rope, which he always took on such trips. About a month ago, a young cheetah was transported through this area from a private nursery to a rehabilitation center. Rare news for these parts, and Michael remembered it. He knew that the animal had been temporarily kept nearby to prepare it for life in the reserve, and he mentally noted to himself that he needed to be especially careful that day. The forest seemed quiet, with only the sound of the river and the wind in the leaves breaking the silence. The radio dispatcher checked communications, and Michael made a few notes on the condition of the trail and shoreline, noting small washouts from the rain. Everything looked calm, but he didn't yet know that a routine detour would soon turn into a dangerous ordeal where every second counted. Suddenly, Michael heard a strange sound, a low wheeze, as if someone were gasping for breath nearby. He stopped, took the walkie-talkie off his shoulder, and listened more closely. The sound was repeated, muffled, desperate, intermittent, as if the beast were lying exhausted and trying to breathe. He moved towards the dense shrubbery by the water. Each step was cautious, the wet ground slippery, the roots of the trees hidden beneath the foliage. The sound grew louder and louder, and Michael realized that someone was in trouble right at the river's edge. The branches were whipping his arms. The grass was wet, but he kept walking, carefully pushing the leaves apart. He saw footprints in the mud. light paw prints. Michael knew it wasn't a dog or a bobcat. The elongated tracks and the distinctive pattern were too elongated. His heart beat faster. He crouched down to get a better sense of the direction of the tracks. They led straight towards the water. The wheezing grew stronger, and now it was clear that the animal lay very close. The rescuer quickened his step, ready to rush to the rescue at any second. When Michael reached the shore, his heart felt like it was hitting his ribs. A young cheetah was floundering in the muddy stream. His paws were frantically cutting through the water, but slower and weaker. He was choking, barely lifting his muzzle above the surface. In a moment, he would be swept away by the current. The rescuer threw his radio off his shoulder and jumped straight into the river. The icy current knocked his breath away, hitting him in the chest, trying to carry him downstream. Michael worked hard with his arms and legs, pushing forward as the water slapped his face and ran down his collar. The cheetah had already begun to go underwater when he managed to grab it by the scruff of the neck. The beast's body was wet and slippery, but Michael held it against him to keep it from pulling away. With one hand he held the beast, with the other he made his way to the shore. The water tried to pull them apart, throwing them off course, but he did not release his grip. He struggled to reach the shoal and pulled the cheetah into the shallow water, then collapsed, gulping for air. Then he got up, carefully put the weakened animal on his back, and walked up the slope. The cheetah seemed too light, dangerously emaciated for its age. Water dripped off both of them, leaving a wet trail, but the rescuer didn't stop until he came to a dry bank. On the dry bank, Michael gently lowered the cheetah onto the grass. He was barely moving, his whole body shivering with cold and fatigue. His eyes half closed and his breathing a low hiss. Up close, he could see that his fur was soaked to the skin with water. His claws were broken, and his paws were scratched from rocks and twigs. Michael knelt down, checked his pulse, and gently probed his ribs, making sure there were no fractures. He pulled his first aid kit from his backpack, pulled out a thermal blanket, and carefully laid it next to him. Then he took off his jacket to warm the animal with his own body heat, and wrapped the raptor in the silver fabric. The cheetah moaned softly, but allowed the rescuer to continue. Michael spoke softly, soothingly, bringing his hand to the animal's muzzle to control its breathing. He realized every minute counted. Hypothermia could kill even a strong predator. He stayed close, keeping his palm on the cheetah's side, feeling his chest rise and fall unevenly. The rescuer's heart was beating as hard as the beast's, but he wouldn't let himself flinch. Too much depended on his calmness. Michael carefully picked up the cheetah in his arms and carried it to his SUV. He laid the animal on the thick mat in the back seat, covered it with a blanket to keep it warm, and quickly started the engine. The car rolled gently down the narrow dirt road along the river. There was a veterinarian's office ahead, where Michael decided to take the raptor without delay. It took about half an hour to get to the clinic. During that time, Michael looked back periodically to make sure the cheetah was breathing evenly. Several times, he quietly said something reassuring, more to himself than to the animal. At the gate of the veterinary center, they were already waiting. The doctor on duty and assistants quickly carried the cheetah on a stretcher to the reception area. Here, under the light of bright lamps, he was examined, connected to a new drip, and offered warm food through a syringe doser. The animal weakly moved its paws when it smelled food. The doctors decided to keep the cheetah under observation for at least a few days. Michael stayed a little longer to make sure the animal was settled in a separate box, and then signed the papers and handed it over to the full responsibility of the clinic staff. When he went outside, the sun was already setting, but for the first time all day, he felt real relief that the cheetah was now in good hands. For several days after the cheetah was brought to the clinic, experienced veterinarians took full control of it. Every day, they carefully checked the animal's condition. They took his temperature, listened to his breathing, monitored his pulse and appetite. The cheetah was fed a soft, nutritious mixture, gradually adding fresh meat to strengthen muscles and regain strength. Every day, the predator came to life. At first, he cautiously raised his head and tried to make a few steps, then began to move confidently around the enclosure. His eyes became full of life again, His fur became thick and shiny. His ribs were no longer translucent. Once the doctors were satisfied that the animal was fully recovered, the long-awaited day of his return to the wild arrived. Michael and the veterinarians transported the cheetah to a safe, expansive savanna, away from human settlements and roads. The location was chosen so that the animal could immediately adapt and hunt on its own. The cage was carefully opened. The cheetah first paused, looking back at the people, as if realizing that it owed its life to them. Then it made several sharp jumps, easily overcoming the tall grass, and disappeared into the green sea of the savanna. Michael stood beside the vets, watching the animal's every move, and smiled a rare, touching moment when man and wildlife find common ground again. Morning is just beginning to bloom over the savanna. Warm golden light breaks through the light mist, and long shadows fall across the cracked ground. The pregnant elephant that National Park staff have been watching for weeks has separated from the herd again. She is wearing a GPS collar around her neck that allows her every move to be precisely tracked. Biologists are watching her from a safe distance. The jeep is quiet. No one wants to spook the animal. Sometimes they turn on the drone to see her from above, but they try not to fly too close. The elephant walks slowly through the dry grass and then lies down to rest. It is obvious that she is running out of time. The silence is broken only by the morning wind and the rare voices of birds. Everything seems calm, but only at first glance. Scientists notice that the elephant's behavior is changing. She is nervous, often looking around, as if looking for a hiding place. What happens next? You won't believe it. They decide to stick around for as long as they need to. After all, sometimes these observations end in incredible discoveries. And tonight, they have a moment that will change everything. Stay tuned. What comes next will shock even seasoned experts. The sun had just risen over the savanna, the golden light softly illuminating the dry, cracked earth and the sparse acacia trees. A pregnant elephant with a huge, almost absurdly large belly lay on her side, breathing heavily. It was clear from her posture that labor was about to begin. Nearby, at a safe distance, stood a jeep with researchers and veterinarians. No one interfered, but everyone was closely monitoring the animal's condition. A GPS collar was used to track her pulse and breathing. A veterinarian checked through binoculars to see how often the elephant was breathing and recorded the readings. "She's very tired, but it's going naturally," one of the specialists said, taking notes. The elephant's huge belly rose and fell in time with her heavy breathing. Time passed slowly, and the tension grew. The researchers knew that what they had been on duty here for weeks was about to happen. What happens next? You won't be able to look away from the screen. The morning sun had risen higher, the golden light shining brightly on the dry savanna. The elephant with her huge, absurdly large belly lay on her side and breathed heavily. Now labor had begun in earnest. The belly was visibly contracting. Each thrust was visible even from a distance. Two rescuers and a veterinarian came closer, but were careful not to frighten the mother. They could see that the process was natural, but they were ready to help. Sometimes elephants labor for hours and may require intervention. One monitored her heart rate on a GPS collar, while another kept equipment on hand to cool and moisturize her skin so the elephant wouldn't overheat. "Hanging in there, good. Just a little longer," said the vet as he watched the elephantess tense up. The huge belly lowered visibly, and finally the first movements of the cub showed. A few minutes later, the baby elephant came into the world. As the mother tried to get up, the rescuers helped clear a space around her to keep the baby from getting stuck in the dry grass and cracks in the ground. The elephant immediately began helping the cub up, gently pushing it with her trunk, swatting its ears, protecting it from insects. For the humans, it was a moment that cannot be forgotten. They saw a real new life, right there, among the acacia trees and the cracked earth of the savanna in the golden light of morning. The morning in the savanna became brighter. The golden light of the sun illuminated the cracked earth. The rare acacias cast long shadows, and a light wind dispersed the fog, leaving only the hot air saturated with the smell of dry grass. The mother elephant, exhausted by the long labor, lay on her side, breathing heavily. Her huge, recently absurdly swollen belly had noticeably fallen. Now, a tiny elephant calf lay next to her. His skin was still shiny from the dampness. He was clumsy, barely moving his legs. 2 rescuers and a veterinarian stood a little further away so as not to disturb the mother. They had helped clear the ground around, but now they retreated, watching nature do its thing. The mother elephant rose to her feet with difficulty. Her movements were slow but confident. She sniffed the baby, gently pushed him with her trunk, helping him to stand up. The first attempts were unsuccessful. The baby elephant fell onto the cracked ground, clinging to the dry grass with his little feet. But the mother did not give up. She picked him up again and again, protected him from annoying insects, covering him with her huge ears. Finally, after a few minutes, the baby took his first steps. Awkward, shaky, but real. The mother immediately stood next to him, as if showing the way. The rescuers smiled. They had witnessed a moment that happens only once in a lifetime. After a while, a herd appeared in the distance. The mother elephant let out a low call, and other elephants moved towards her from behind the sparse acacias. They surrounded the mother and baby in a tight ring, forming a living shield. Now the baby was out of danger. For the researchers, this was not just a day in a national park. It was an encounter with nature itself in its grandeur and fragility. They knew that these images would serve as proof of why such places should be protected at all costs. The sun had risen higher, the morning mist had finally cleared, and the savannah was filled with bright, dry light. The elephant looked exhausted. Her huge belly had finally emptied, but her strength had left her. A newborn baby elephant stood nearby, shuffling uncertainly on long, still weak legs. Its skin seemed moist and slightly wrinkled, like all newborn cubs. 2 rescuers and a veterinarian watched them from a safe distance, recording every movement. The GPS collar showed that the mother's breathing and heart rate were gradually returning to normal. However, the anxiety did not disappear completely. Somewhere nearby there could be danger, because the smell of blood attracted predators. Gradually, her herd approached the elephant. The older females lined up in a semicircle, protecting mother and baby. They gently touched the newborn with their trunks, sniffing it as if to confirm that it was ours. The air was filled with the low hum of their voices, and the dry ground trembled beneath their footsteps. The rescuers looked on. It was a rare moment to deliver a wild elephant and see the herd deliver the baby. What happened next shocked even experienced biologists. By noon, the heat had become unbearable. The air trembled over the hot ground. The grass stood still, as if frozen. The elephant, though exhausted, was already on her feet. Her newborn baby elephant was walking beside her, moving more confidently now, following its mother as if it always knew what to do. The herd closed ranks, encircling mother and baby in a tight ring. The older females stopped trumpeting alarmingly, their steps becoming measured and calm. 2 rescuers and a veterinarian watched as the animals slowly moved deeper into the savannah. It was a moment when human intervention was ending, and nature was taking over again. The GPS collar showed steady readings of the elephant's health. The scientists recorded the latest data and realized that they had witnessed one of the rarest of rare events: the birth of a wild elephant in a national park, right in front of their eyes. But no one expected that a few days later, GPS data would show a strange movement of the herd, and this would be the beginning of a new mystery. Thank you for watching to the end. Give us a like and subscribe to the channel to support us.